Welcome back to another episode of HealthCap Weekly Wrap. We've got a packed lineup for you this week, with 5 stories that span regulatory compliance, workforce strategy, clinical nutrition, medication management, and pharmacy innovation.
Yeah, and even though a couple of these stories came out a little earlier this year, they're still just as relevant now as they were then. Maybe even more so. We'll talk through the big takeaways and how they tie into what you're probably already seeing or thinking about in your community.
Let's kick things off with the recent OIG compliance guidance that's been making waves. This came out of McKnight's, and it's one of those stories where the headline says voluntary, but what's actually behind it carries a lot more weight.
Yeah, this is the Office of Inspector General's new guidance specifically for nursing facilities, but really, any senior living community that receives Medicare or Medicaid dollars should be paying attention. The document outlines what a strong compliance program should look like, and even though they say it's not mandatory, it's absolutely being used by auditors and investigators.
Exactly. What's different this time is that the guidance goes well beyond billing or coding. It includes quality of care, staff training, medication oversight, and even how communities respond to resident complaints, so it's a much more holistic view of what compliance means.
Right. One example they give is how substandard care, even if it doesn't involve fraud, can still be seen as a compliance failure. So it's not just about doing things by the book. It's about whether your systems actually protect and support your residents.
And I think the biggest takeaway here is that compliance can't be a standalone department anymore. The OIG is really pushing for integration between compliance, clinical leadership, and your quality improvement teams.
Yes, and they specifically mention governance, making sure the board of directors or ownership group understands the risks and actively oversees the compliance program. It's about creating a culture of accountability from the top down.
So even if you already have a compliance officer and a set of policies, it's time to revisit them. Ask yourself, are we identifying risks proactively? Are we doing regular internal audits? Are we acting on the results?
And documenting that follow-up, because that's the kind of detail an auditor will look for. Again, the article is from McKnight's, and it's a great prompt for leadership teams to sit down and reevaluate what compliance looks like under today's expectations.
Now let's switch gears to something a little more concrete: wages and staffing. This one's also from McKnight's, and it looks at the relationship between frontline worker pay and CMS Five-Star Quality Ratings. And let me tell you, the numbers are eye-opening.
They really are. The researchers dug into payroll-based journal data, that's the wage and staffing data submitted to CMS, from about 12,000 nursing homes between 2020 and 2022. So this is a massive data set. And they found that when RNs, LPNs, and CNAs were paid more, the communities were significantly more likely to earn higher quality scores.
For example, just a $1 per hour increase in RN wages was linked to a 2.4% better chance of getting a 5-star rating. And when you look at a 10% increase in pay, the odds go up by 53% for RNs, 32% for LPNs, and 15% for CNAs. That's substantial.
It is. And what makes this study so useful is that they controlled for the usual confounders, things like whether a facility had more money to begin with. So these wage changes were isolated from other advantages.
And the researchers pointed out something we hear all the time. Higher wages help attract better qualified staff, improve retention, reduce turnover, and support stronger care continuity. All of that contributes to better outcomes.
There's also a really important caveat here. If communities focus all their wage increases on RNs and leave LPNs and CNAs behind, you get what's called wage compression that leads to resentment and frustration among staff, which can actually increase turnover in the roles you're most trying to stabilize.
Exactly. So if you're using this data to advocate for higher wages, make sure it's part of a balanced staffing strategy. And from a policy standpoint, this study adds weight to the push for Medicaid reimbursement reform. Communities can't sustainably raise wages without support from funding systems.
That's the bigger picture takeaway. If we want to improve quality, we need to invest in the workforce. And not just with training, but with compensation that reflects the complexity and importance of the job.
That one's a must-read if you're in HR, finance, or administration. And it's another reason to revisit your staffing plans before year-end budgeting.
All right, shifting into clinical care now, let's talk about nutrition. This next piece comes from the journal Cureus. It's a little older, but the findings are so practical that they deserve another spotlight.
Yeah, this study focused on residents aged 75 and older living in nursing homes. And it looked at how much energy and protein intake was needed to prevent weight loss over a 6-month period.
They found that residents who consumed more than 30 kilocalories per kilogram of body weight per day and more than 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram were significantly less likely to lose weight.
So, for example, if you have a resident who weighs 150 pounds, which is about 68 kilograms, they'd need over 2,000 calories and at least 80 grams of protein per day to stay nutritionally stable.
And that's not always easy to hit, especially for residents with poor appetite, cognitive decline, or medical conditions that interfere with eating.
No, it's not. But this gives your care team a target. It's not just about eating well. It's about hitting those nutritional thresholds to avoid the downstream risks of muscle loss, immune compromise, and functional decline.
It's also a reminder that this isn't just the dietitian's job. Nursing staff, aides, even therapy all play a role in identifying residents at risk and making sure they're getting the support they need during meals.
And don't forget the importance of documentation. If a resident is eating only 50% of meals, but their intake is still meeting the calorie and protein goals, that's very different from someone eating 50% and falling far short.
Exactly. This article gives teams the opportunity to have more precise conversations about nutrition goals and interventions. Definitely one to share at your next interdisciplinary care meeting.
Now let's go a bit deeper into medication management. PharMerica released a resource on oral phosphate binders, which are used primarily for residents with chronic kidney disease, especially those who are on dialysis.
Yeah, these meds help manage phosphorus levels in the blood, but they only work when taken with meals. And many of them require multiple large pills several times a day. That's a big challenge in terms of both resident compliance and staff administration.
And each class of phosphate binder, whether it's calcium-based, lanthanum, iron-based, or polymer, has different side effects and pill burdens. So the key message from this resource is to assess the whole picture. What's working for the resident clinically and what's working operationally?
One resident might tolerate one class well but struggle with the number of pills. Another might experience GI issues with a certain formulation. So this is where pharmacy consultation becomes essential. You might be able to switch to a lower burden option with equal effectiveness.
And let's not overlook the role of food services. Because these meds need to be taken with food, timing matters. If a resident eats slowly or inconsistently, it's easy for doses to be mistimed or skipped altogether.
That's a workflow issue. You need nursing, dietary, and pharmacy all on the same page to make sure residents are getting these meds at the right time with the right meal.
The PharMerica resource lays all of this out clearly. It's a good one to pull out at a morning stand-up or during a clinical review.
Okay, last one, also from PharMerica, and this one's a bit more educational. It's about biologics and biosimilars. And honestly, it clears up a lot of confusion that still exists around how these drugs are prescribed, approved, and substituted.
Biologics are complex medications made from living organisms. Think monoclonal antibodies, vaccines, insulin analogs, gene therapies, anything that comes from a biologic process instead of a chemical synthesis.
Biosimilars are kind of like generics for biologics. But not exactly. They're highly similar versions of an approved biologic, with no clinically meaningful differences in terms of safety, potency, or efficacy.
But, and this is important, not all biosimilars are considered interchangeable. Interchangeability requires additional clinical trial data showing that the biosimilar can be swapped at the pharmacy level without a new prescription from the provider.
And whether substitution is allowed depends not just on the FDA's designation, but also on state law. Some states allow pharmacists to make the switch. Others require prescriber sign-off.
The PharMerica guide includes a table with real-world examples, like Humira and its biosimilar Amgevita, or Lantus and Semglee. It also directs readers to the FDA's Purple Book, which is basically the biosimilar equivalent of the Orange Book for generics.
And for clinicians, they recommend using DailyMed for up-to-date prescribing info, storage requirements, dosing, side effects, especially for newer or less commonly used meds.
So if you're in a leadership or nursing role, this is a great resource to better understand what's coming through your pharmacy, and it gives you a clearer view of how cost-saving strategies might impact your residents.
That's all for this week. Thanks for sticking with us through a full slate of topics. If you'd like to dig deeper into any of the stories we talked about today, you can find all the links in the weekly roundup on Angie's blog at healthcapusa.com/Angie's blog.
We'll be back next week with more. Until then, thanks for everything you do to support your communities.